the slides. Thanks for the organizer, Dalia and Bita, for inviting me and organizing this whole thing to be able to present among all the, and many other organizers, to be able to present among all these respected researchers and professors I look up to all the time. So my talk is titled around execution quality of solver-based DEX. But after talking to the audience yesterday at the reception, I added a bunch of slides to introduce what is DEX. But after today's talk, I kind of regret. But just the self-introduction, I'm Danning Sui. I'm a data scientist at Flashbots. I'm not affiliated with Sui. It's just my last name. But it's an honor, you know. So Flashbots is a company that's focused around MEV-related research and infra tool, and also solutions for the retail to be able to, you know, avoid or mitigate MEV attack or, you know, like impact in their trades. So the agenda today, I try to lay out a lot of like context about like DEX and overall the history of how I view the DEX protocols has evolved so far, especially on Ethereum layer 1. It's I would say the most mature system for designing a product to be, you know, the best beneficiary towards the user, as well as, you know, not only the traders but also LPs, and then to introduce what is a solver-based DEX, and then talk about why we care about like to measure the execution quality across different DEX, and the results from the empirical study I initially wanted to talk about. So here's a slide that's kind of like famous. It's kind of like called the MEV supply chain. You can see basically it's like a workflow how user interact with blockchain, and particularly it can be any application, but basically the user entry points would be like a front end. They go to, and then they will in the end have to confirm transactions in the wallet in a normal, workflow, and then usually the wallet will expose the transaction to a mempool. Searcher will be able to look at the user transaction, maybe construct a sandwich or front running or back running, and then send a bundle to builders and then land it on a validator. This kind of touches a lot of things that Siamak and Malesh talked about in the PBS stack as well. But this is not the focus of the talk today, but I want to basically use this mental framework to also introduce that, saying, hey, if you think about the DEX landscape or like the supply chain, it's similar. It's basically user entering a front end, and then behind the front end, they might call an API that is touching different AML liquidity pool or market makers for market making on DeFi, or it could be a solver DEX, which means they outsource everything to a set of solver who then do the same thing. But I'll have more diagram about this. Okay. All right, thank you. So here's like a recap of basically my understanding of how the whole DEX trading solutions evolved in the space. If you start from like 2016, 2017, when Ethereum just launched, you can see that people started to implement the vanilla model of order book, where basically there's Alice and Bob, and I want to trade to buy USDC, you want to sell USDC to ETH, and there's a match. So there's also a lot of like related teams that is running kind of like a relayer. They're matching the orders. And then in 2018, 2019, Uniswap had this innovation about like say, hey, what if we just allow anyone to like click and deposit and like solve the whole liquidity fragmentation issue? And so basically like Uniswap kind of started the DeFi summer-ish thing, and then there's like, you know, like tweaks around it. There's like Curve and Balancer, who are like especially trying to be better pricing in terms of like stablecoin, etc. And around 2020, 2021, we have a lot of teams starting to think about, now that we have a lot of AML pool and liquidities, the liquidity is kind of fragmented again. What if we just aggregate all of them to find actually a better price? So now if, you know, like at that point, there's users who want to trade USDC to ETH, there's like 5 different pools with different price. But if you have a router that can route across multiple pools and like aggregate the best portion of the liquidity and stack it up, it might actually become a better outcome for user, right? So then like Matcha, 1inch come out, which is actually aggregating across not only the AMM pool, but they're also having like user order book where you can actually like submit a limit order in the front end. There's also like market makers starting to come in, which also brings in a lot of institutional money. And we know as of today, there's like 2-3 market makers that are biggest, for example, like Wintermute, SCP, and Toka Lab, and a few others. In 2022, CowSwap kind of came up and say, hey, we know that like, yes, like if you aggregate the liquidity, it's probably gonna be a better pricing than just you go to like a single, AMM pool and get the price. But what if we throw an auction? So basically, CowSwap introduced the concept of like solver-based model. We're saying, oh, if we introduce some competition and outsource this, job to a set of solvers, they might actually, provide better price than just aggregation. And at the same time, there is MetaMask, who is basically pretty much the major adopted wallets in Ethereum. They realized actually, hey, users are really lazy. They just want to swap within one UI. Like we can charge them 87.5 bips, which is nearly 1%, meaning whenever you swap $100, they charge you $1, and users are still swapping.
Coinbase takes two.
Okay, Coinbase takes two. According to a MetaMask employee, they just told us. Right. So there's all these evolution has been going on. In like 2023, more and more projects starting to adopt the solver model concepts. So 1inch started the 1inch fusion. Uniswap introduced the Uniswap X. I have some personal take. I think Uniswap X is definitely adopting the solver model concepts, but more is serving as a functionality to introduce the RFQ liquidity, which is the institutional money, where the market maker can provide and compete with like off-channel inventory they have on central exchange. So just a quick note of like what's going on in the latest year, 2025. What I'm seeing is basically in the past 2 years, a lot more team has to start to think about capturing MEV as one of those solutions that Yamak mentioned in his slides. For example, CowSwap started map blocker. Flashbots has this thing called map share, where we basically gonna expose users' trades to a set of searchers who are gonna try to background and provide some refunds to users. So again, add a little bit more pricing improvement to user. So I kind of call it like DEX with OFA, order flow auction. But also it's gonna be very interesting to observe what's gonna come out from Uniswap V4 hooks, which kind of officially launched in the beginning of this year. So to look at the data on chain, this is pretty much like a recap of how the whole evolution started and like evolving so far. Starting from the beginning, from the left is like kind of like DeFi summer in like July 2020, when it was mostly just Uniswap. And so I categorize them as the pink called the DEX front end, and then the darker layer on top of it is called aggregator integrators. So for example, whoever the front end that is using like 1inch API or 0x API, which is taking one step further to try to aggregate different liquidity from AMMs. And then there's wallet swap, which is orange, which is like, for example, MetaMask swaps or any other swap that is like, for example, OKX or IM token. Those are wallets which all have like the swap functionality supported. You can see the portion of volume is fairly small, but it's pretty steady. It catered towards a cohort of the users who just fine with it. Then there's solver model, which pretty much includes basically CowSwap, 1inch Fusion, and Uniswap X, which is introducing this auction competition thing. And then there's like a special type on the top that was like pretty a thing in the last whole year in 2024 is Telegram bots. So it's like together with the meme coin energy, and there's all these like Telegram bots where they will create a wallet for you, providing also they will store your private key. But like the people who are really degen, they don't really even care about the like security sense. They will probably deposit like $100, $200 and trying to snipe really like the most degen long tail meme coin just dropped and trying to make some money. We can see that pretty much this volume doesn't really stay. So like it kind of diminished around the beginning of this year. But I would say another comment on this is like Ethereum at the end of the day turns out to be not really serving these use cases. And all these volume are like mostly happening now on Solana and Base, which has like a lower fee as well. So if you study the attributes of all these trades from different dimensions, we can find a lot of other interesting patterns. So on the left side, the chart is showing us like if we break down the trade size by buckets, we pretty much can see a concentration of for like Telegram bots trades are oftentimes is like around $100, a few $1,000 at most. They will never have like $1 million trade happening on Telegram bots. Who would actually send $1 million to like like the bots who have your private key? And then wallet swap also centered around like smaller trades. Same thing for the DEX front end today. And then meta aggregator is leaning towards bigger trade, and the same as solver model, which actually takes up more than or around like 50% of volume when the trade is above, I think 500K is a divide. And then on the right side, the chart is showing, it's also interesting if you segment the trading pair, or basically if you analyze the, risk profile of the assets that being traded, The first one is long tail, and the second is pegged, meaning like ST ETH to ETH, or like WBTC to BTC, which basically has pretty much not much like price discovery, unless there's a huge like depeg situation, right? Most of the time, if market maker is trading those, it's pretty much rebalancing. There's probably barely any price to be made or in the arbitrage. ETH BTC would mean like the major coin, like WBTC to USDT, or like ETH to USDC. And you can pretty much see that solver model serves most of the purpose of like the major coin and the pegged. Meanwhile, like DEX frontend and Telegram bots is serving the long tail token trades. It makes a lot of sense because like a lot of meme coins just exist on like Uniswap V2 pool, and you can pretty much only trade it on Uniswap frontend if other aggregator or router didn't integrate that pool. So let's see. Okay, what happened? Okay, I'll do this. So like, this is like kind of like a very how to say concentrated chart, but mostly I want to just paint a picture of how the coordinates divide in terms of the different front-end the use cases they serve. So basically, pretty much like the solver or meta aggregator are serving the use cases of when users are trading larger trade size, trading less frequency. But if you are like trading a high frequency, small trades, oftentimes it happens around like Telegram bots. As of today, if you're trading like large volume and also high frequency, it's still probably existing in centralized exchange. For example, like Binance or Coinbase, or if it's going to be MEV bots. So yeah, a few more concepts I want to introduce as well, just to make sure everyone is on the same page, is RFQ. And it's like a loaded term, and I think like in TradFi people have different understanding, but here's my definition for RFQ in DeFi. So it's pretty much a limit order that has a fixed price with maybe a 30-second expiry provided by a professional market maker. So compared to an AMM order, actually it's MEV free, because in the transaction call data, it's specified, okay, I will take this amount of asset from this address. There is no, like slippage or like price curve to be happened. This diagram is meant to show, like the whole supply chain concept, where if you go as a user from the front end will call the DEX aggregator API, and the API usually have two set of liquidity they pin towards. So one would be the DEX aggregator's AMM routing algorithm that is checking liquidity distribution, LD, that is across AMM 1, 2, 3 pool. It could be like Uniswap, could be SushiSwap. But also they have a set of like market makers they're pinging towards for a quote. And then they compare the price across the RFQ and also the AMM price. But again, like here, there's a lot of problems, which also prompt the research, the empirical study that we did, is how do you trust the DEX aggregator is comparing the fair price? Because at the end of the day, as the space evolves, there's a lot of like contract deals and partnerships starting to form, between market maker and the DEX aggregator, right? So if I work with multiple market maker, I actually gonna charge them, say, a 5 bips fee, say, hey, if I give you this amount of like million of traffic then this month, you have to charge me 5 bips on top of the volume you make. Maybe the deal with different market maker can be different. So in this case, the aggregator may actually promote one of the market maker if they actually will make more fee, right? So measuring all these is very important, and transparency as well. So just to show like the historical data, you can pretty much see, even though, so starting from 2021 to 2023, this chart, even though like the market was kind of dying down around 23, which was kind of bear market, you can see the number of the colors of all these RFQ integration across different DEX has been increasing, and so like more and more color, like a lot more team has starting to like integrate with market maker as well. I refreshed this chart this morning, and the 2023 number from last slide stops around here. So you can see the RFQ volume just has been going up and this gray, this gray is coming from Uniswap X. So again, like as my point earlier, Uniswap X is a very strong component for the users on Uniswap frontend to be able to access, off-chain RFQ liquidities. And another thing to mention is that, as the market maker gets smarter and smarter, they're starting to remove the middleman in this whole thing. It's hard to read this chart, but I'll just go through. This is the same, this is the same, like the workflow. When you go from the MetaMask wallets, you go pin the router, and then behind the router, there's a set of router that you're pinning. That's why we call it, meta aggregator. And one of the market maker just decided to just cut 1inch, just go talk to MetaMask directly. Say, hey, we can just give you this quote. You don't need to go through a aggregator, and we can basically cut the 5 bips fee. So that's what's going on today. And okay, I have 5 minutes, but I'll just like quickly run through what is solver-based DEX, which is pretty simple here. Like the same chart, but there is an extra layer of components added where basically say, okay, a set of solvers, you guys can compete and basically give me the better price. And as of today, the design is not really decentralized, even though it was meant to be, right? But I believe like CowSwap and others will have some roadmap down the line to try to decentralize it. And then you can see this solver model has been adopted more and more over time, started by CowSwap, but then 1inch Fusion, and then Uniswap X. This chart again is having more data here that's showing that CowSwap has been really taking up in the past few months. The gray disappeared, but it's because my data hasn't incorporated their new table. But their number is somewhere around 1 billion per month. So it's somewhere around the same scale. They're reaching around 10 billion per month as the solver-based DEX. And so that kind of introduced the idea of why do we want to study the execution quality, right? And if you're a user in the front end, obviously building a product and that you want to like improve the user experience and improve the better price for user is very intuitive. Another thing just to make sure to point out is that when you look at the front end, it tells you, okay, if you sell 1 ETH, you're getting this much USDC. It's not exactly the amount you're getting in your wallets. There is a difference between the quoted price and the actually executed price. This is a loaded chart, but it's basically saying that there's multiple components from the price impact and also the trade collision or MEV bots that's causing the slippage of your trades. But basically, this is the idea of saying like, hey, we really need to measure and to actually know beyond the marketing language which DEX actually give you a better price. And second of all is solver DEX now is basically a pretty good symbolic category to study now that they have reached pretty much combined over 50% of the DEX volume market share. And a few things to note from the study is that basically, so this would be like a list of like, I guess, insights from the data, is that a lot of these solver DEX are pretty concentrated by market maker. We know that Uniswap X design idea is to introduce RFQ, so it's kind of not a surprise where you see 95% of volume comes from SCP, Flow Trader, Wintermute, Tokalab. And if you compare with multiple platform, for 1inch Fusion, it's also 3 market maker making 80% of volume. You don't really need to read in the slides, but just look at the color chunk and you can kind of see CowSwap as the most decentralized, where there's only 1 top market maker making 25% volume, but the next 5 is making each of the 10%. Few other thing we noted is that, like the liquidity profile of the solver platform kind of differ pretty a lot, and CowSwap mostly having AML liquidity, 1inch Fusion kind of in the middle, Uniswap X has most of the market maker liquidity. Similar thing as how long tail token are mostly provided by AMM, but as long as the risk of holding the asset goes lower, there's more and more market maker willing to participate. And so we did a study, basically looking at 6 months of data, compared long tail and the short tail asset, USDC and Pepe pair, across 1inch Fusion, Uniswap X, CowSwap. And so to compare how the historically executed price versus a simulated price compare, and this is the results. So basically, in the box plot, you kind of see that, okay, basically for USDC WETH pair, all these solver DEX actually improved their execution compared to a V2 pool, which is a naive, constant function pool, where also it's likely less concentrated with liquidity depth. But it's gonna be very hard for them to outperform the V3 pool. And a spicy take is people be like, okay, does this chart mean CowSwap is better than 1inch Fusion than Uniswap X? Of course, it's a chart crime if you don't look at the liquidity distribution. Trade size distribution. So when we control the trade size, we actually see that, okay, actually all of them are having a more and more pronounced improvement of price as the trade size goes higher, especially go higher than 300K. For Uniswap X and CowSwap, turns out the small trades has significant noises, and that's probably why causing the box plot, like the median looks negative. But overall, it's showing that solver DEX has been improving user welfare compared to V2, but harder for V3. And then one last thing to compare is that for Pepe WETH, it's like totally different because noting that the liquidity condition is very different for long tail assets. For the Pepe pair, it was way less liquidity, and also V2 was a lot more concentrated compared to V3. And that's why we see that the simulation showed that the solver actually executed price was performing way better than V3, but not V2. So that's pretty much the study and the talk, and thanks for attention. Any questions? Nice. No hard question, great. If anyone wants to chat, feel free to find me. Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
yes,
I got
please.
one. So how much do you think that like the defaults on a lot of these platforms like contribute to some of what you see here? Because they, yeah.
Yeah, I think your question touches a few things. The default is, I think one of the UCSB student here, I think Robert, you wrote a paper about like the power of default of like how slippage threshold is the dominant case, and a lot of people, you can see the actual distribution of all the slippages happens is always touching around like some default slippage threshold. So it is definitely the major case where all these trades are hitting whatever the default is. But the second part of the question is, because this study, specifically looking at solver decks, there's a bias, how the front end decided how to direct the user towards either a solver or the classical router. We acknowledge this is a limitation of the study. But yeah, we hope to be able to collect more data that can also reflect, for example, how exactly what time user requested at the front end. Because right now, the study also is only looking at the block settlement time, which could be the user waiting for 30 seconds. And but yeah, I think there's a lot more data to be done for this.
Yeah, it could be cool to get data from like Solana as well, because transaction fees matter, right? Like, and if I'm doing a huge trade, maybe if the trade fails, it's like no big deal. So I'm willing to do a much tighter slippage versus a small trade where it's a significant hit.
Yeah, I think on Solana, revert might be more of a problem, because like I think they have this thing where for each block there's only a certain amount of transaction can touch a contract state. In the case of Solana, also the distribution of the assets can also be very different from L1. As we mentioned, like meme coin trading is more dominant there. So, but agree, yeah.
Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you.